Hey everyone, this is Ryan Robinson here. If you haven't seen me on before, I'm one of the guys who does a lot of the work behind the scenes with the podcast, and just wanted to jump on before some of these podcasts coming up to ask if you would be willing to give us some feedback about what is and what is not working with the podcast so far. So we've set up a survey on the website, and if you have a couple minutes before or after this podcast, just jump over to mennonerds.com/podcasts/survey and you'll be able to fill it out there, and that'll help us figure out what we can keep doing from here on. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Steve Kimes, a pastor to the homeless in Portland, Oregon.
And my name is Ebony Adedayo. I am a pastor here in St. Paul, Minnesota. I am the founder of the Kinky Curly Theological Collective, and I wear lots of other hats.
Man, I need to found something. I'm going to have to found something.
You totally should.
That sounds very cool. All right, and welcome to BGWG, Black Gal, White Guy, in which a black gal, that's Ebony, and a white guy, that's me, get together every couple weeks to rage against the machine in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Today we're going to be talking about climate change and how it is a government conspiracy to force us to redirect funds. Wait.
That's not what it is.
Oh, you mean climate change is real?
Yep.
Okay. All right, fine. I guess we'll believe that it's real then. Anyway, we're going to be talking about that. Okay, so let's get some recommendations in. So, Ebony, what are you recommending this week?
I don't think I've recommended this book before. I've been recommending it to everyone that I come in contact with, and so I'm quite surprised that I have not done so with you as of yet. It's called Faces at the Bottom of the Well. It's by Derrick Bell, who was a lawyer. He is now deceased. I believe he died in 2000 something. African American lawyer who talked about the permanence of racism in America. I bought this book a couple years ago and finally read it right after the election. Can I tell you, it was on time. It was timely in my reading because it just really talked about how throughout different periods of the US history, no matter what's going on, the underlying current in America and its disposition towards it really centered African American, but I think you can really draw conclusions for other communities of color as well as American Indian groups that racism and that hatred against people of color and African Americans has remained permanent. And so reading it after the election, it's an allegory, so it's not true, but through these parables, like Jesus's parables, except Derrick Bell is not Jesus. I'm not drawing a comparison there. I just want to be clear that y'all know. But through these allegories, similar to the parables that Jesus told, there's so much truth that can be derived from them. He wrote this in 1980, 90, and it still spoke so. The volumes that it was speaking in 2016, right after the election, was still very telling. There's this essay in this book called Space Traders. I'm not a sci-fi fan at all, but this essay resonated with me in so many ways because even though it was telling this story about African Americans being traded to space and that would never ever happen, the truth that he was able to communicate through this really outlandish tale was just really profound. And so go to your neighborhood half-price books or Amazon or wherever you can find this and please get it. Please read it. It should be on all required reading lists across all college institutions because it's really good. And I feel like for people who are doing the social justice work, who are doing political organizing work, you have to understand just what we're up against. And I think Derrick Bell just lays it out in a really compelling tale. Off soapbox.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. No, will run out and I will get that one. And so, if I could, I would go on Amazon right now and check it out. That I'm doing something else right now. So, all right. My recommendation is one that a lot of people have actually read, but I'm going to recommend it again. It went through the rounds and a lot of people read it, but I'm going to recommend it again. Is called When Helping Hurts. And it is by Steve Corbett and Brian Fikkert, which is a weird name. Anyway, When Helping Hurts was actually written specifically about, like when youth groups or service groups go to another country and then they want to help or to save these people in this other country, to do a service project to help people out. And they talk about how a lot of those projects actually fail. And I know from personal experience, there's all these groups and stuff like that who would come over to, and they'd want to come to my ministry and say, well, we want to help the homeless. And they would come for a few hours and feel like they really made a big change among the homeless. And they didn't even talk to them. Anyway, and so a lot of times these groups cause more problems than help. This book explores that, but it also talks about how these kinds of groups, how not necessarily these kinds of groups, but if you really wanted to help, if we really want to help Puerto Rico right now, if we really want to help places that are in need, that's been devastated, whether that be Florida or whatever, how are we going to approach that? How do we do that? What is an approach that actually helps instead of hurts? So it's a really good book. I really recommend it. It's basically kind of a primer along those things, but it's a primer that a lot of us in churches need because we're pretty naive about what helping actually looks like.
Do you think we're naive or we just want to do what we want to do?
I've seen a lot of these groups, and I think most of them are naive. Maybe leaders of the groups are a little less naive, but almost all the groups are naive. And I'll be honest, I was one of these. 19 years old.
Oh, yeah.
I went to India. I went to Calcutta, and I wasn't there. I was actually there to go to school, so I was there to learn. So that ended up being a very positive experience for me. I don't know how positive it was for anybody else. And I just want to let you know that when I was 19 years old, I went to India and I had a hat a lot like this. Anyway, and so so I don't know whether that was a positive thing or not, but I do know that because of that experience, I learned a lot, and it paved the way for me to eventually learn about helping homeless in this nation. So I think there's ways that it can really work. And so you're saying, are we naive? I was naive. Absolutely.
The reason I asked, I studied missions in undergrad and in seminary. And so I think the whole just construct around missiology and short-term mission trips and even long-term missions and just being people from one culture going to live in another culture to help save these other people. I think that there's so much there that needs to just be tackled in a whole new approach that needs to emerge, probably with analysis from books like When Helping Hurts, but just altogether we need to rethink the way that we do missions and evangelism.
Okay, so let's get on this. So this summer has been hot, and it's been crazy. And it's not just because of crazy events, it's been literally hot. We have had enormous damaging earthquakes in and near the Caribbean, and we've had massive fires in the West. In fact, if you look at a map, at one point it looked like the entire West was on fire. So who knows what's next? Well, actually, climate change scientists have predicted the strange weather that we're having right now and say that more and more and worse is going to come. One scientist has said that every single one of us can recognize the change of weather, and she says her name for it is, instead of global warming, we should call it global weirding, because we all recognize, we just say, wow, the weather is really weird nowadays. So we should just call it global weirding. But others are saying that, others are even denying that climate change is real. And so Ebony, I just want to ask you, do you think climate change is real? Is that something that's really going on?
I don't think climate change is real. I know climate change is real. I know. It's real. um, and I'm not a science nerd by any stretch of the imagination. But I know that things are changing in our earth. I know that the way that we treat the earth is responding. I know that temperatures are rising and there are things that we have not seen before, even though I'm relatively young. I'm still young. I got a few gray hairs, but I'm young. That things are happening and developing in our world that we need to take note of. Our neighbors around the world that live in areas that are below sea level they are reporting that their land mass is disappearing. We're seeing so many different changes, and I think one of the things that's really telling to me is that we can't expect to treat the earth a certain way and that it's going to keep being okay. Like, even though the earth is not a person, it is an animate object. It lives, it breathes, it grows, it has different periods and times in which it does its life cycle just like a human being does. And we know if we stuff our bodies with bad food, we are going to see the results, right? If we
Hey, wait a minute. I don't know about that. Don't tell me that. It's too late now.
I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna tell you like it is. If you stuff your body with bad foods, like for example, for me, I have really bad heartburn. And I've learned over the years that there's certain things I just can't eat. I can't eat spicy foods. I've learned recently that gluten is a no-no. Sugar is largely a no-no. Dairy has always been a no-no, but I'm from Wisconsin and I really wanted to resist it. But now that I know that is a no-no, I just have to stay away from it. I know that when my body eats those foods, that I'm going to be in intense pain. I'm going to gain weight. I'm not going to be comfortable. I'm going to be miserable. But when I stay away from those foods, my body does fine. And I believe that the earth responds in the same way. When we treat the earth with loving kindness and care, the earth responds one way. And when we don't, it responds another way. Just like our bodies, the earth is a living, breathing organism that may not necessarily have feelings like we do, but definitely has its ebb and flow in terms of how it responds to things. And so the more and more that we trash the earth, the more and more that we pump toxins into the earth through pipelines like Doppel and things of that nature, the more and more we spill oil onto the ocean floor, the more and more the earth is going to react. And we can't pretend that just because it doesn't have a soul in the same way that we do, that it will not. The Bible talks about us having care over the earth, having dominion over the earth. It's not to manipulate the earth. It's to actually just care for it. Take care of the trees, take care of the animals, take care of the land, the sea, things of that nature. I am not an outdoors person. I do not enjoy being outdoors for any extended period of time. And so for me to say this is a lot. I think it's beautiful. I just don't enjoy being out there because I have so many different allergies. I hate creepy crawly things. I hate being hot. So I just have a lot of, the fall is my favorite season because all the creepy crawly things grow away. It's no longer hot. My allergies are still acting up, but I mean, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, right? So I say all that to say that I think people think about dominion and they manipulate that word. It just really means to care after, to take care of, not rule over, take care of. And I think we're doing a really bad job with that as human beings overall. But I really think that the corporations, corporate meaning body, these entities that have become bodies that have the agency to vote and make decisions like human bodies do, even though they're organizations and companies with billions and billions of dollars who now can control the interests of multitudes of people, are really making some really poor decisions for us that are having disastrous effects globally.
And just to go back on what you were saying as far as what God's hands are. I mean, we have the creation accounts, and like you were saying, dominion. I think that dominion does mean rule over, but we're supposed to rule over the way that God rules, not the way that the worst people rule. If we were being ruled by somebody who enslaved us or beat us or stole us or started lopping off organs from our body, we wouldn't be very comfortable either. That's not the kind of rule that we want. Where it says that human beings has dominion over the earth, it also repeats that in Psalm 8. But it doesn't make sense to say that that kind of a dominion is like a dictator or a despot who is abusing and enslaving or lopping body parts off of people. That is not the kind of rule that the Lord Jesus has established from the beginning of the earth. That's not the kind of rule that he has us doing. And in fact, actually, I think that in Psalm 104, there's a really great example of the kind of creation that God wants, in which every organism and every part of creation is providing food and water for other parts of creation, that it's all working together, it's all supposed to be. And so we human beings, if we're supposed to be in charge of this, we're not in charge of it just to take advantage of the earth, but instead we are here to care for the earth and to care for one another. And by one another, I don't just mean other human beings, but the entire biosphere. The fact is that, like your analogy, if we eat bad, then we're going to feel bad. Also, if we treat our environment bad, we're going to feel bad. It comes back on us. So we've got to. So it's not just a theology; it is just common sense.
It is.
Take care of our body.
Absolutely. Which is why I think rule is the wrong word. I think in our Western context that has, where so much is about rule and dictatorship and who's in charge and leadership, we don't know what to do with the word rule in a really just way. So I want to put rule to the side and just think about how we care for one another, how we care for the earth and the environment. I think when we replace rule with care, it's a different connotation. That if I'm caring after the earth, as I'm caring after my body and I'm caring after my family, I'm going to behave a certain way. If I rule over things, even as a benevolent ruler, can sometimes make some really awful decisions because they think that they are in charge and that they are in control and they get to make the decisions. And so I think sometimes ruling and being in charge of things can sometimes go to our head. I think that that's even what you begin to see happen in Genesis 3 and 4 as this idea of ruling and authority gets into the minds of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, that they're not able to do with that what God would have them to do. But when we care after and when we partner, I think partner is another word. And so we are partnering with the earth, with everything that God has created to make the world beautiful. We can't do the work that the sun and the stars and the moon does. We need them to shine and to give us light. We can't do the work that the water does. We need it to provide what it does, its nutrients, so that we can have life. Animals all are in this food cycle that is so important in order to sustain equilibrium and balance. I was even listening to one, I don't know if it was a Code Switch podcast or something else that I was listening to, that even talked about how important bees are in order for our food to be pollinated so that we can eat healthy fruits and vegetables All these things are important, and when we exploit them, we actually end up exploiting ourselves. If we kill off all the bees, we're killing off our food. What are we gonna eat then? You know what I mean? If we poison all the water, what are we gonna drink? I mean, there's bottled water has to come from something and doesn't come out of thin air. It's purified from something. And if we poison it all, what do we drink? If all of our land is being decimated by oil and tar sands and so many other things, where do we live? Earth is not just this continuous open supply of abundance that just keeps replenishing without consequences. And so I think we have to think rationally about what it is, how we treat the earth, how we treat the living things around us. When we think about Genesis 1 and 2, one of the things that I used to hear a lot in seminary and in college is that humans being made on the sixth day are the pinnacle of God's creation. And I don't think that's true. And so I think when we think that theology, we think that, we're the highest living being. And so we have this amount of power and agency that these other things don't. But look at this, right? We're the last thing that's created, meaning that we are the most dependent thing that is created. God needed to have 5 other creation days set in place before he could even think about creating animals and human beings. Meaning that if it wasn't for creation day number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, we wouldn't be able to exist. And so we are so dependent on these things. When we exploit them and wipe them out, we in essence wipe ourselves out.
That is excellent point. Excellent. So climate change is real. Care for the earth is something that we got to do. But I want to ask you something else about climate change. So some people have said, in fact, there have been headlines and stuff like that that says that climate change is the same for everyone. That basically when hurricanes come, everyone is hurt by them equally. But do you think that some people are affected more harshly by these kinds of things than other people?
Yes. Many communities are more affected by climate change than other communities because environmental racism is real. Because communities may not necessarily have the resources that other wealthier, whiter communities have to leave very disastrous situations or to repair and build after these situations. So we know in cases like in New Orleans, when that Hurricane Katrina happened, it affected everybody. But we know that homeowners who had flood insurance, had a little bit of wealth, who were able to escape, who were able to do certain amount of things, were better off than homeowners or renters or whomever else, whatever housing status, did not have access to those things. And so that's why it hurts some people more in more profound ways than others. I know that in Hurricane Maria that just devastated Puerto Rico, the absence of heat and electricity and water has made a situation that was already really sucky even more disastrous. When we look at Puerto Rico, we look at what that country, though they are part of the U.S. territory, has meant politically over the last 100 years. There's a lot of racism that's there in terms of the way that we treat this territory that's supposed to be a U.S. territory. They can't vote in elections. They can't elect a president. They don't have the political power. They have representation without any decision-making authority whatsoever. And so, of course, Puerto Rico is going to be affected worse than Florida or Louisiana or any other state in the United States that has been hit by a hurricane. I think all things come into play.
And also, I know that we both listened to the Code Switch podcast that also talked about climate change. They were talking about how in Los Angeles, when there was an unseasonable heat wave, I mean, there's a heat wave all the time, but it was particularly hot and particularly devastating, that it was people who didn't have very much money, people of color especially, would end up being hurt. Their health was hurt more seriously than, and so they're going to be losing work on top of the low income that they already have. Their children are going to be missing school, things like that, simply because they don't have the money to get air conditioning. And then when you say, well, you need to get, they go to the hospital and say, we have all of these problems. They say, well, it's the heat. You need to get out of the heat. And they're like, where are we going to go? We're on the 3rd floor of our apartment. What are we going to do? We don't have anywhere we can go.
And so I think all of those points that you raised because of the podcast are really, really valid. One thing I want to say as I'm remembering that podcast, one thing that really, really bothered me is that, so you have this community that is vulnerable because of the heat waves. They don't have access to air conditioning, and many people are dying because of the heat waves, as a podcast reference. One of the things they talked about is having all apartment units have access to air conditioning, and the battle that they were having because some of the environmental groups were kind of protesting and resisting that. I say this to say, I feel like climate change and environmental groups sometimes are so disconnected from the realities that people of color face. Climate change is real. We need to pay attention to what's going on. But if it's not led by color, the decisions that environmental lobbyists make, that climate change scientists make, will not be in the best interest of people of color. And so we not only need to think about the environment, we need to think about the economic realities and particularities of people of color and those who do not have access to wealth and means. One of the things I was really disturbed by in this podcast is here are people who have access to wealth making decisions for poorer folk who do not have that, who are dying because of their decision making. And so I think that's a really good example of how when movements that are supposed to be for the good of all of us, when they're not led by all of us, end up hurting people of color disproportionately. And so as we think about these things, we just need to be very cognizant that the movements need to be representative of those who are disproportionately affected by what's going on globally and nationally and locally. Wherever things are going on, there needs to be meaningful representation of those most affected.
So do you think that there is a difference? Let's say if there's a disaster that particularly hits a population of color, let's say Puerto Rico, do you think that there's a difference in how the media represents disasters of communities of color as opposed to just broader communities or communities of European descent?
I think they can. I think that if Puerto Rico was not a U.S. territory, that we would be having a different conversation. I think that if Puerto Rico, because it's a political landmine, right? If we weren't paying attention to Puerto Rico right now, we would be eaten alive. As much as the U.S. has done a really bad job in meeting the needs of our brothers and sisters on this island, if the media was not paying attention to it the way that they were, I think it would be political suicide. That aside, if we were talking about something that was outside of the U.S. territory, I don't think we would be given the coverage that we do. One of the other reasons I think that we cover Puerto Rico the way that we do is because we, as much as I hate 45, like maybe hate is such a strong word, I strongly dislike number 45. Our media does have a vested interest in blowing up every single thing that he does and making him look bad. And so I think that that's one of the media's motives in making sure that the spotlight is on Puerto Rico, because as we talk about Puerto Rico and and what's happening to what 45 is or is not doing, if that was not the case, I don't think the media would be paying the attention that they need to for him. Because let me tell you, 45 gets them ratings. As much as they say they can't stand 45, it's because of their obsession with him that we're in this mess. If we just let him disappear into the night, we wouldn't be here. And so I think that there's this obsession with him that with what is going on with Puerto Rico, they're covering it in a particular way, and they're saying that he's not doing this, and this is what the mayor said in response to what he said, and this is what he said on Twitter, and this is what he did at the press conference. All awful. Like, so I'm not excusing it. It's like all awful. And at the same time, they want to make sure that he looks awful. I mean, I want to make sure he looks awful too. What I'm saying is that if it was outside of the U.S. and it was happening to another country, another region, our media would not be that interested. There are things going on in Cameroon right now that our media isn't even covering because 45 has nothing to do with it. You know what I mean?
Well, and the same thing, just before all the hurricanes hit the United States, there was floodings and hundreds of thousands of people dying in India.
And in, was it Senegal or Sierra Leone where there were mudslides and people dying? I didn't hear any. I heard about it because I have friends from Senegal, from that country, and I saw on it on Facebook. I didn't hear one word about it on NPR or any of the other media outlets that I listen to.
But if you're connected with groups like Mennonite Central Committee, then you're going to be able to see these things, you know? So there you go.
That's right.
Just got to choose the right media. And actually, a lot of times I get my news from BBC. So when I call up my my browser, the first thing I see is BBC World News. So that way I'm actually trying to get something outside of the media bubble that we're all trapped in. Well, let me just ask you one thing. Okay, so, I mean, there are a lot of disasters, and we're going to see a lot more disasters happening as climate change gets worse and worse. And there's going to be areas or disasters of people of color are going to be more affected, and areas in which Europeans are going to be more affected. And we can't respond to all disasters. We just can't. You know, there's too much going on, and the world is going to get, as far as weather, it's just going to get worse and worse. So what would be a fair way for us determining about which disasters should get our focus, or which ones should get our finances as well? You know, we have 5 of them just this summer. Who are we going to help?
It's almost like asking what child gets fed, right? I think we need to find, where there's a will, there's a way. Where there's a political will, there's a political way. And so I don't think it's a question of what do we pay attention to. I think it's a question of how we make sure that our response is critical and swift and as inclusive as possible. It's not a resource question. It's a hospitality question. It's a political will question. How are we going to make sure that the needs of people in our country, in our world, are provided for? I believe there's more than enough. We are a really rich world. It's because of the way that political power works that it doesn't feel like we're really rich. There's abundance of resources. And so we need to think creatively about how we do that.
I think part of it too, especially as a nation, let's say, for instance, I have 5 rooms in my house that I can invite people to come and stay in. If I have 10 people that need help, well, I can only help 5 of them. So I can't help all of them. However, I can call up my friends, or I can contact my friends and say, hey, I've got these other people that need a place to stay. I can't help them. I can only help so many. How about you? Can you do that? Well, we can do this on the political stage too, or as a church. We can say, well, we've got resources that we're feeding to this, but we're also concerned about this. I'm going to ask you guys, you have resources. Could you help these other places? Because we're covering this one. Maybe you could cover this one. and that's the same thing as the United States. You know, it's something that happens quite often, that maybe the United States is saying, well, we're going to give money toward this issue, and Japan is going to give money toward this one. And so I think what you're saying is that in the world, the resources are there. We need to share both the resources, and we need to share the opportunities to help.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, our country is stingy, and it's just gotten stingier in the last 10 months. And we know that our administration wants to cut so many different things. One of the things I think is the most hilarious and ironic at the same time is that as they were doing their budget cuts and wanting to make sure that they were cutting taxes, all these hurricanes started showing up and popping up, which is affecting their political strategy, right? Because if you don't respond, that looks really, really bad, right? And so all that to say, we need to have the political will to do it. And we can do the partnerships, and we can do the alliances, and we can do the big thing. I know that that's what the world was beginning to do with the refugee crisis that was happening in the Middle East. As people were leaving Syria, as people were leaving Iraq, what countries are stepping up to make sure that the needs of these people are being provided for, right? But a lot of countries shut their doors because they decided that this refugee problem was not their problem, and that, in fact, if they invited these people in, that would make things worse for them. I think that happens so much around not only climate change disasters, but just when the needs of people are abundant, because people think they don't want to pay for it. They want to scapegoat other people and put the blame on them. Like 45 wanted to put the blame on this mayor in Puerto Rico when she didn't cause it. I mean, she's doing the best that she can. That woman is so amazing, so dynamic, and wanted to scapegoat her, saying that it was because of her that her country was basically in the space that it was in. And so I think that that's what ends up happening when things like this that's what ends up happening when disasters like this happen. Nobody wants to take ownership, responsibility. No one wants to do the leadership around it, and just wants to point the fingers because no one wants to pay for it.
Well, it's interesting because just in this conversation, I think one of the things that really kind of helped me, something new that I hadn't thought of before, is just how much the media that we listen to, the media that we pay attention to, is really affecting how we are going to provide support for people who are affected by climate change. That's just an amazing thing, you know, because if we get focused too much on one person instead of the people who are actually hurting, get focused on the president instead of focused on everything else, then we could really lose sight on the reality of what's going on.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to wrap it up for tonight. So that's all for BGWG for tonight. We want to thank Ryan Robinson. No, we really, really want to thank Ryan Robinson because we're giving him a cluster mess tonight. And we want to thank MennoNerds for their support and the editing of this podcast. Thank you for editing this podcast. If you have any questions about our discussion, or if you would like to rage at the machine or at us, please give us an email at bgwg@mennonerds.net. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you and give you peace.
Hey everyone, this is Paul Walker. If you like what you just heard, be sure to check out more of what we have to offer at MennoNerds.com. It's the hub for all things MennoNerds. From there, you can learn more about these podcasts, syndicated blogs from people all over the world, books authored by some of our members, and a host of other exciting free resources for you and your church. Now, there's one last thing. What we do costs a bit of money, and we're always doing it on a volunteer basis. We have people that are committed to making this happen, but we could use more people. If you like what we do, please consider donating monthly. We have two options. You can either do a monthly donation through Patreon, or you can give a one-time donation at any time through PayPal. We love the work we do, but we do need your help to keep it going and to expand into new territory. If you would like to donate, check out MennoNerds.com/donate. Thanks for listening, and as always, have a great day.